It's my pleasure to now bring up Rio Koide, who's been looking at the specifics of the urgency of this. He is a researcher, policy researcher at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, and this 1.5-degree lifestyles report looks at the targets and actions for reducing lifestyle carbon footprints. It was just released in February of this year, and it's also with Aalto University, DMAT, Citra, and the CARE Foundation. Rio, come on up. So. Actually, you can come on this side. I'm going to place you in the sunshine here. Right. Great, so I'll give you this. Right, so of course you define lifestyle carbon footprints in the way that I just spoke about, which is that they directly emit, it's both the greenhouse gas emissions from directly emitted and indirectly induced household consumption. So excluding those from government consumption. Could you tell us what you found? Here's the slide to bring everybody up to speed.
Yes, sure, thank you. So what we've proposing here is the per capita per year footprint target, long-term and mid-term. And what we're saying here is a 3-to-1 toned approach, roughly speaking. So the average of the consumer's footprint as of now, it's 4.5 to 5 tons globally, but it should be reduced to 3 tons by 2030. By 2050, 2040, it's going to be 2 tons and then 1 ton by 2050. And if you consider like 1.5 degrees target without relying on negative emission technology like CCS, which is quite dangerous, we'd say, because of the probability issue, we need to reduce a bit further more, 2.5, 1.4, 0.7 tons.
So that's huge.
Yes, huge. Actually, it was depressing for us, all of the research team. Oh my God, we found out this. It's great, but how we do it?
How are we going to do this?
Yeah.
So, and you looked actually at Brazil, Finland, China, India, and Japan. What are the scales of reductions for each country?
Yes, so these case study countries, you can see the footprint here as a bar chart. Our Finnish colleague, our colleague from Finland, they have 10.4, and Japanese has 7.6, and China, Brazil, India 4.2, roughly speaking 3 ton and 2 ton. And it's really massive reduction necessity we found out. As you know, it's 80 to 90% reduction for Japanese and Finnish are pretty much similar to other developed countries. But another striking thing for us is that even developing countries, they exceed 2050 target or even 2030 target. So we need to start thinking about how we can bring everyone in this globe to this lighter living or the living within a planetary boundary.
Yeah, and of course it's across these different sectors because you looked at sorry, yes, did you want to say something else around that?
No, sure.
Yeah, so we were basically looking across the big sectors, nutrition, housing, mobility, consumer goods, leisure, and services. And when we looked at food, so here is a typical meal in Finland for a bigger dinner party. This is Peter Menzel's work where he looked at a family and what they eat in a month. So this is Japan, the Ukita family.
It's very typical.
Very typical. Thanks.
Too many things, materials. Yeah.
And then in Brazil, the New York Times just did family meals around the world. This is from Sao Paulo, Brazil, and the kind of food that they're eating on a typical night. Mm-hmm. So what you did is you compared them across these different countries. And so along the bottom, you see the amount of kilograms per capita per year of the food consumption. So you see there's more being consumed in Finland than Brazil, for example. But then you see the carbon intensity up the left-hand side. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's talk about the story here.
Oh, yes. So it's been really interesting to compare our case countries. As you can see from here, in Finland, most of the emissions hotspot is from meat and dairy product. And it's been like, they have been also saying that we need to reduce cheese consumption or, this dairy consumption because it's quite high carbon, in addition to meat consumption. Yeah. But that story was not exactly same for Japan. For example, dairy consumption in Japan, this lighter blue bar is quite small. So maybe in case of Japan, it's not the main part, but of course the red one, meat, has quite high carbon intensity, like over 8 to 9 kilogram of CO2 per kilogram food. But in Japan, maybe rice consumption or fish consumption, these are also a little bit of concern. So we need to also think about how to make these rice consumption sustainable as well. And in case of Brazil, beans and meat consumption are quite impactful part. And across, if you compare Brazil with other developing countries, actually their food footprint is relatively higher, probably because of the higher meat consumption.
Yeah, that's right. So in Brazil, they do have some really great menus that have beans in them, which we should all learn from. And then they've also got, of course, their tradition of eating steak. So you see some of those kinds of tensions there. And then in transport, you compare it across these different countries. So do you want to speak a little bit to what you found there?
Yes, sure. So it's much, we have much more large diversity between countries. Like for Finland, first of all, the footprint itself is very different. From Finland, it's 3 tons per capita, and Japan is 1.5 tons. China, India, Brazil is less than 1 ton per capita per year. And in case of Finland, car is quite large part, but also for Japan, the red part. But our colleagues have been saying that, Japan has maybe better lifestyle. I'm not sure. Train and metro has it's serving. It's quite used quite often. Well, but you can also notice this little dotted line, broken line. That's actually the target. If you downscale this 3 to 1 ton into, so we assign this 3 to 1 ton to mobility domain, and it's very small, but you cannot see it very obviously. But even for Japan, it's really overshooting. It's we need to reduce like 80% or 70% or 90%. So it's really challenging. I mean, how we do this? It's not just about intensity, like providing low carbon options, but maybe we should also think about how we address this amount of mobility, like maybe telework or other way of living. Like we don't move around so much, but maybe we can live sustainably with high well-being.
Well, that's a great point, Rio, because I think with lighter living, we often focus on the technology. So how do we still use a car, but use an efficient car? It might be a hybrid one. Mm-hmm. But I think what was really interesting to me and what I think was interesting about the report is it looked at 3 major solutions. What you're just speaking to, why are we moving? What are we eating? How often are we eating? How are we living? What kind of electricity are you using? And actually looking at amount reductions in that. Then you have those efficiency gains, smaller consumption, but same consumption, but smaller carbon intensity. So this would be the hybrid car, or perhaps moving from more meat-based to a plant-based diet. And then you can also have these modal shifts. So you can actually shift towards a bus, say if you're driving a car. So they've also been called avoid, shift, and improve. So you might want to avoid, as you're saying, some of these lengthy trips. We could shift to a cleaner mode or improve the fuel consumption, for example, of a car. And then you kind of did a big calculation of all of the low carbon lifestyle options for Japan.
Yes, actually we did it for Japan and Finland. So what we did is like reviewing different literature and then identifying the what kind of lifestyle changes it's possible to make a lifestyle low carbon. And what we found out is that, it's been also said in another literature that the kind of low carbon options which is being used in Japanese education or even government awareness raising, it's talking about very little thing, like turning off the light. That's also important, of course, or maybe like giving more space to your refrigerator and between the wall, or eco driving. That's like not do like rapid acceleration. But before that, let's think about that. How many refrigerators do you have at home? Or do you need to really use car before talking about eco driving? So what we did is that we try to focus on systemic changes, which is like to make a rapid reduction, even increasing that avoid or reduction approaches. So for example, in the case of Japan, for housing, before maybe, of course we should save energy, but maybe shifting the electricity to renewable electricity is really have a big impact, and we should do that quite soon. And also maybe insulation, improvement of insulation, or in case of mobility, shifting to electric vehicle, but also public transport, or maybe you can relocate your home to closer to workplace, or maybe introduce telework if your employer allows. or maybe closer weekend leisure rather than going to overseas holidays. Or in case of food, like vegetarian or vegan diet, or shifting from the red meat to white meat or fish consumption, or maybe some of us have been eating too much probably, and maybe has other issue. So
And
reducing overeating part, that's good for your health.
It's also
and
good
also,
for your health.
Same for like public transport and bicycle use. Why not, if it's healthier and low carbon, why not we do it?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, just one point. I mean, I couldn't talk about that, but I'm sorry to say, but I'm almost sure that Canadians' footprint is much larger than Japanese and Finnish, I think.
It is.
Oh, yes, here we have Professor Bill. Yeah, so I mean, we still haven't covered Canada, but hope maybe in sometime in the future maybe we can do it for Vancouver or Canada as well. And the good point is that, I mean, we have an international team, so we can compare actually. And actually some of the low carbon is culture specific. So it's very interesting, like maybe Finnish, our colleague said that, oh, this Japanese option is useful for Finland, so we can exchange.
Exactly. And I think what you're getting at also about some people over-consuming, and there's also under-consumers. So part of what we want to do is actually look at vulnerable populations that might not have enough. And so there is both of those issues going on at the same time. And actually, Jenny Moore did do calculations for Vancouver and for many other places to find out how we can shift our approach here in terms of footprints from the ground up, really using bottom-up data, which has been instrumental for all of us to know if we're moving in the right direction. And you talked also about adoption rates, like how many people actually take it on. So, when you looked at, a 75% adoption of these different activities, you could actually get to this 1.5 degree target.
Yeah, so this is like after identifying these individual options, we calculated what will be the aggregated impact on the reduction of carbon footprint, and this was again depressing actually. We listed 30 options, including vegetarian or living up your car, and assuming average Japanese, or maybe say all Japanese people, 70%, and on average. Assuming that 75% of the Japanese take these options, 30 options, all of them, then we can finally reach 1.5 degree target. It's really challenging.
Yeah.
So the point is that we cannot do it by just individual actions, by consumers' effort alone. So it's really about a system, including infrastructure, or maybe you cannot buy low carbon product if it's not sold in the nearest supermarket, for example, or you don't have bus services. Or bicycle lanes. So it's about a system, but also individual effort. And the point I'd like to emphasize is we shouldn't make like delay of actions by blaming other stakeholders. It's quite typical that a consumer needs to do something, or a company needs to do something, and like a dichotomy between this production and consumption. But we need to really start doing both things soon.
Great. Thank you, Ryu.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.